The first thing Darius Cole saw was Evelyn Parker's cheek pressed against wet grass. The second thing he saw was Officer Nolan Vance pulling her hands behind her back like she was 40 years younger and had just sprinted out of a bank with a sack of money. And the third thing, the part nobody at Mason Creek Park ever forgot, was the look on Darius's face when he realized the woman in the burgundy coat was the same woman who had once handed him a plate of fried chicken and told him, "Baby, pride is fine, but it does not keep you warm at night." It was late October in Briarfield, Ohio, one of those cold, bright afternoons where the sky looked too blue to trust, and the leaves made the sidewalks look like somebody had spilled a box of old postcards across town. Mason Creek Park was busy that day. Not crowded exactly, but alive in the way small-town parks get when there is a farmer's market near the entrance, a youth soccer game on the east field, and 3 different people pretending they're only walking their dogs when really they are checking to see who is having trouble with who. Darius had just locked up his gym 2 blocks over, Cornerstone Boxing, where he spent most of his afternoons teaching 14-year-olds how to keep their hands up and their mouth shut, usually in that order. At 48, Darius did not have the knees for a ring anymore, and truth be told, he did not miss the spotlight much either. He had spent enough years getting punched in the face for strangers to understand that a quiet walk around the lake was a pretty fair trade. He was halfway through the park when he heard the shouting. At first, he thought it was a couple arguing near the bandstand, because in Briarfield that was never a bad guess. Then he heard a man's voice cut through the wind, sharp and impatient. "Put your hands behind your back, ma'am." Now, Darius stopped. Across the walking path near the old stone benches by the creek, Officer Nolan Vance stood over Evelyn Parker while his partner, Officer Tyler Boone, knelt beside her with one hand on her shoulder. Evelyn was 72 years old, maybe 73, depending on who was baking her birthday cake that year. She had silver hair tucked under a knitted green cap, sensible shoes, and a canvas tote bag with little sunflowers printed on the side. She was not dangerous. She was not fast. She had arthritis in both hands, a bad hip, and the kind of stubborn pride that comes from surviving enough hard years to know when somebody is trying to make you feel small. Darius knew all of that because when he was 19 and sleeping in a beat-up Buick behind the gas station, Evelyn had been the cafeteria supervisor at Briarfield High. She had never asked him why he was hungry. She had never made him explain why he was too embarrassed to come inside. She just wrapped leftovers in foil, slid them through the back door, and told him, "Eat first, figure out life after." That was Evelyn. She was the sort of person who remembered your birthday even when you forgot it yourself. So when Darius saw her face against the grass, one side of his body went cold and the other side got hot. The whole thing had started 20 minutes earlier at the Autumn Makers Fair, a little event held every year beside the park where people sold candles, homemade jam, paintings of barns, and jewelry priced high enough to make you wonder whether the artist had found gold in the basement. A woman named Marla Benton had reported a missing diamond pendant from a display table. It was a small thing, about the size of a thumbnail, but Marla was married to Councilman Benton, and in Briarfield that meant a missing pendant could suddenly become a town emergency if the wrong people were standing nearby. Somebody at the fair had told the police that an older black woman in a burgundy coat had been seen near the jewelry tent. That was all they had. No video, no witness who saw a theft, no name. No clear description beyond age, race, coat color, and the kind of vague confidence people tend to use when they are describing somebody they never really looked at. Evelyn had been wearing a burgundy coat because it was cold. She'd walked past the jewelry tent because she was looking for the kettle corn stand. That was apparently enough for Officer Vance. Vance had been with Briarfield Police for 11 years and had built himself a reputation for being decisive, which sounded much better than impatient when people said it at department dinners. He was up for sergeant in a few weeks, and everybody knew it, including Vance. He had been trying to clean up his image after a few complaints about rough stops and a loud argument with a local mechanic that had somehow made it onto Facebook. A quick arrest tied to the councilman's wife might have looked good on paper. A quiet old woman sitting by the creek with no one around to defend her probably looked easy. Tyler Boone was newer, younger, and still had that look some rookie officers get when they are trying so hard to look confident that they mistake fear for authority. He had followed Vance's lead because that was easier than asking questions. And that was how Evelyn Parker ended up face down in the grass, with her wrists pulled behind her and a crowd forming at a safe little distance, the way crowds always do when things get ugly and people are deciding whether their phones are enough. Darius walked toward them slowly at first. Not because he was afraid, but because he knew what anger could do when you let it drive. He had learned that lesson in arenas, in parking lots, in arguments with men who had looked at him and already decided what kind of person he was. His hands were loose at his sides, but his jaw was tight enough to crack a walnut. Officer Vance looked up when Darius got close. "Move back," Vance said. "This is police business." Darius looked at Evelyn, then looked at the handcuffs dangling from Boone's fist. "You got a reason she's on the ground?" he asked. Vance gave him a flat stare. "She matches the description of a suspect in a theft case." "A suspect in what?" Darius asked. "Stealing a necklace?" Vance's eyes narrowed. "How do you know that?" Darius glanced toward the fair tents. "Because half the park has been talking about it for 20 minutes. This town can keep a secret about as long as it can keep a pothole filled." A few people in the crowd laughed, nervous little laughs, the kind that come out before you can stop them. Vance did not smile. "Sir, I need you to step away." Darius crouched down, keeping his voice low. "Miss Evelyn, can you hear me?" Her eyes moved toward him. They were wet, but not just from fear. There was humiliation in them too, and that was the part Darius could not stand. Evelyn tried to lift her head. "Darius," she whispered, "I did not take anything." "I know," he said. "Just breathe." Officer Boone reached for her arm again, and Darius stood up so fast the young officer froze. "Easy," Darius said, still quiet. "She's not going anywhere." Vance stepped closer. "You are interfering with an active investigation." Darius looked him up and down. "No, officer. I am asking why a 72-year-old woman with a cane in her tote bag got treated like she was dangerous. She resisted. She fell," Evelyn said from the ground, her voice shaking. "He pulled me." Boone looked away. It was only for a second, but Darius saw it. So did a woman in a blue scarf standing near the creek. Her phone was up, camera pointed straight at the officers. Darius turned toward the crowd. "Anybody see what happened?" For a moment, nobody said anything. That was the hard part. It usually was. People knew what they saw, but they also knew what speaking up could cost in a small town. Then the woman in the blue scarf raised her hand. "I did," she said. Her voice was thin at first, then steadier. "They grabbed her before she could even explain why she was here." A middle-aged man standing beside the bench spoke up next. "She was feeding the ducks. I saw her. She had a bag of crackers." Vance looked at him. "Sir, step back." "No," the man said, surprising himself as much as anyone else. "You step back from her." The air changed after that. It was not dramatic at first. No one cheered. No one started to chant. But people stopped pretending they had not seen. Phones came up. A teenager in a soccer jersey called to his mother. "Mum, they slammed that lady down." A vendor from the fair said, "That is not the woman I saw by the jewelry booth. The woman I saw had long black hair." Boone looked at Vance again, this time with something close to panic in his eyes. "Nolan," he said quietly, "maybe we should check the description again." Vance did not answer him. He was staring at Darius now, and Darius could almost see the calculation moving behind his eyes. Darius was known in Briarfield, not famous in the movie star sense, but known enough. He had won regional titles years ago. He had coached half the boys in town at some point. He had raised money for the community center when the roof caved in after a storm. He was not a man Officer Vance could shove aside without half the county having an opinion before dinner. That seemed to bother Vance more than it should have. "This woman has not been cleared," Vance said. "Until she is, we are taking her in." Darius leaned closer, not threatening, just close enough that Vance had to look him in the eye. "Then clear her," he said. "Do your job. Ask questions. Check the video. Talk to witnesses. But you do not get to throw somebody to the ground because you are in a hurry to put cuffs on the first person who fits a lazy description." Vance's face tightened. "You think because you used to box you can intimidate officers?" Darius let out one breath through his nose, almost a laugh, but there was no humor in it. "No, I think because I used to box I learned the difference between strength and swinging at somebody who cannot hit back." That landed. You could feel it land. Even the wind seemed to pause for a second. Vance took a step toward him. "You are dangerously close to obstruction, and you are dangerously close to making this the worst decision of your career," Darius said. Behind him, Evelyn made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like someone trying hard not to cry because too many people were watching. Darius turned back to her, and that was when he saw the old canvas tote bag lying open in the grass. The contents had spilled out. A cane, a packet of crackers, a library book, a small blue envelope, and a faded photograph of a young black man standing outside Briarfield High with a plate in his hands, looking skinny, scared, and too proud to admit he needed help. Darius stared at that photo for half a second, then picked it up. Evelyn saw what he was holding. Her lips trembled. "I kept it," she said. "I knew you would be okay someday." Something in Darius shifted then. Not into rage. Rage was too easy. This was something steadier than that. Something older. He slipped the photograph back into her tote bag, looked straight at Officer Vance and said, "You are taking those cuffs off her now." Vance's hand moved toward his radio. "I'm calling for backup." Darius nodded once. "Good," he said. "Call somebody who knows what they are doing." And somewhere beyond the trees, far down by the entrance to Mason Creek Park, the first siren began to rise. The siren got louder, rolling through the park in that long rising wail that makes everybody look toward the road, even when they already know trouble is coming. Officer Vance heard it too, and for the first time since Darius had walked up, something flickered across his face that was not confidence. It was annoyance, maybe even worry. He had called for backup because he expected another uniform to show up, take one look at the situation, and help him put Darius in his place. What he got instead was Lieutenant Mara Ellison, and that was not the same thing at all. Ellison stepped out of the patrol SUV without rushing, which somehow made everyone quiet down faster than if she had started yelling. She was in her late 50s, tall, silver-haired, and built like someone who had spent 30 years walking into rooms where men were already making bad decisions. She had been with the Briarfield Police Department longer than Vance had been alive, or at least that was how people liked to tell it. She had a reputation for being fair, which in a town like Briarfield sometimes made people suspicious, because fairness was not flashy and it did not make for a good Facebook post. But when things got messy, people wanted Mara Ellison around. She took in the whole scene in about 3 seconds. Evelyn on the ground, the handcuffs, the open tote bag, the crowd with their phones out, Darius standing between the old woman and 2 officers who suddenly looked much less certain about their choices. Then Ellison walked over, crouched beside Evelyn and said, "Maram, my name is Lieutenant Ellison. Can you tell me if you are hurt?" Evelyn swallowed hard. "My hip," she said, "and my wrist." Ellison looked at Boone. "Take the cuffs off." Vance moved before Boone could. "Lieutenant, she is a theft suspect. We have not confirmed her identity yet." Ellison did not look at him. "I said take the cuffs off." There was no shouting in her voice. That was what made it hit harder. Boone hesitated, then reached down and unlocked the handcuffs. The metal clicked open and Evelyn pulled her hands to her chest like she was trying to protect something that had already been taken from her. Darius knelt beside her. "Can you stand?" he asked. Evelyn shook her head. "Not yet." "Then you do not have to." He took off his jacket and folded it under her knees so the wet grass would not soak through her coat. It was a small thing, but it made the woman in the blue scarf cover her mouth with her hand. Ellison watched Darius for a moment, then looked toward the crowd. "Does anyone here have video from before the officers made contact?" At first there was a shuffle of feet. People looked at one another. Then the teenager in the soccer jersey stepped forward, holding his phone out like he was offering evidence in court. "I do," he said. "I was filming my sister's game, but I caught some of it by accident." His mother looked nervous. "Evan, honey, maybe let the police handle it." Evan looked at Evelyn, then at Darius. "That is what they were doing," he said. It was such a simple sentence, and it landed like a brick. Lieutenant Ellison took the phone, watched the clip, and her expression changed. There was no dramatic gasp, no angry speech, just a tightening around her eyes. In the video, Evelyn could be seen sitting on the bench with her tote bag beside her. Officer Vance approached first. He asked if she had been near the Maker's Fair. Evelyn said yes, she had bought apple butter and was looking for the restroom. Vance asked to search her bag. She told him she would rather know why. Then he reached for the bag anyway. Evelyn pulled it closer. Not violently, not aggressively, just the way any older woman might pull her belongings closer when a stranger grabs at them. Vance called it resistance. Boone grabbed her arm. Evelyn stumbled, Vance forced her down. The whole thing took maybe 12 seconds. 12 seconds to turn a peaceful afternoon into a public humiliation. Ellison handed the phone back to Evan. "Thank you," she said. Then she stood and faced Vance. "Where is the probable cause for the arrest?" Vance straightened his shoulders. "Witness description. Suspect was an older black female wearing a burgundy coat. That is not probable cause. We believed she may have been attempting to flee." Ellison looked toward the creek, then toward Evelyn's cane sticking out of the tote bag. "Flee where, Nolan? Into the pond?" A few people in the crowd let out a laugh before they could stop themselves. Vance's face went red. "Lieutenant, I was trying to secure the situation. You secured a 72-year-old woman to the ground over a missing pendant and a vague description. That is what you secured." Darius stayed beside Evelyn, but he was listening. So was everybody else. The thing about small towns is that people remember who said what, and they remember it for a long time. They remember it at the grocery store, at church, at school board meetings, at funerals, at every place where nobody wants to be the person everyone whispers about. Vance knew that. His eyes moved from the crowd to Darius and back to Ellison. This is turning into a circus because he decided to interfere. Darius looked up slowly. "No, officer, it turned into a circus when you mistook a grandmother for an easy win." Vance took a step toward him. "You do not know what you were talking about." Darius stood. He was not yelling, but the crowd leaned in anyway. "I know she fed half the kids in this town when their parents were working 2 jobs. I know she kept extra gloves in her car every winter because somebody always forgot theirs. I know she used to sit outside Briarfield High with a thermos of coffee on cold mornings because she believed no kid should walk into school feeling invisible. So do not stand here and tell me I do not know what I am talking about." Evelyn looked up at him, tears sliding down her cheeks now. Quiet tears, the kind that come when someone finally says out loud what you were afraid no one else remembered. Lieutenant Ellison turned to Boone. "Did you see Mrs. Parker take anything from the fair?" Boone opened his mouth, then closed it. Vance looked at him sharply. Boone swallowed. "No, ma'am. Did you see anything in her bag that matched the missing item?" "No." "Did she threaten either of you?" "No." "Did she make any movement that suggested she had a weapon?" Boone stared at the ground. "No, ma'am." Ellison nodded once. "Then why was she on the ground?" Boone took a breath, and Darius could see the kid was shaking. "Officer Vance said she was resisting." Vance snapped his head around. "Watch yourself, Boone." It was the first time he sounded scared. Boone looked up at him then, really looked at him, and something in his face hardened. "She was not resisting," he said. "She was scared." The park got so quiet you could hear the soccer game on the other side of the field. A whistle blew somewhere in the distance. A kid shouted that the ball was out. For one strange second, life kept moving exactly as it should while the world around Evelyn Parker seemed to hold its breath. Lieutenant Ellison called for an ambulance, then asked 2 officers who had arrived behind her to separate Vance and Boone and collect witness statements. Vance objected, of course. Men like him usually did when the story stopped going the way they planned. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You are taking the word of a crowd and a washed-up fighter over trained officers." Darius smiled without warmth. "Washed up, huh? That is cute. I have been called worse by people with better manners." The crowd laughed again, but this time it was not nervous. Vance looked like he wanted to say something else, something sharp enough to cut through the embarrassment, but Lieutenant Ellison stepped between them. "Officer Vance, you are relieved from duty pending review." His jaw dropped. "For doing my job?" "No," she said. "For failing to do it." He stared at her. "You cannot do that here." Ellison looked around at all the phones, all the faces, all the people who had spent years thinking the police would never listen to them. "Actually, Nolan, this is exactly where it needs to happen." Vance walked away toward the patrol SUV, but not before he looked back at Evelyn. It was not an apology. It was not even regret. It was the look of a man angry that his plan had fallen apart. Darius saw it, and he remembered it. Evelyn was taken to Briarfield General, not because anyone thought she had a broken bone, but because when a woman her age gets thrown to the ground, you do not guess and hope for the best. Darius rode with her in the ambulance because she asked him to. The ride was quiet at first. The paramedic checked her blood pressure while Evelyn stared out the back window at the park, getting smaller behind them. After a few minutes, she said, "I hate that people saw me like that." Darius looked at her. "Saw you like what?" "On the ground." crying, looking weak. He leaned back against the ambulance wall. "Miss Evelyn, you are not weak because somebody did something wrong to you." She gave him a tired look. "That sounds like something you tell those boys at your gym." "It is. They do not listen either." That made her laugh just once, but it was enough. At the hospital, the doctor found a bad bruise on her hip and a sprained wrist, nothing that would keep her overnight, but enough to make her sore for weeks. While she was being examined, Darius sat in the waiting room with a vending machine coffee that tasted like burnt pennies. His phone would not stop buzzing. Messages from former students, messages from parents, messages from people he had not spoken to since high school. Somebody had already posted the video, and it was spreading faster than anyone expected. By dinner, it had been shared across the county. By midnight, it had made local news. By morning, it was everywhere. Not because Darius was famous, not because Evelyn was a symbol. It spread because people recognized the look on her face. They had seen it in themselves. Maybe not with police officers, maybe not in a park, maybe it was a boss humiliating them at work, a landlord ignoring them, a neighbor deciding they did not belong, a clerk watching them too closely in a store. The details changed, but the feeling did not. Being treated like your dignity was optional. The next morning, Darius stopped by Evelyn's house with groceries, a new heating pad, and a bag of cinnamon rolls from the bakery on Main Street. He knocked twice before she opened the door in a robe and slippers, looking tired but more like herself. Her living room smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. There were framed photos everywhere. Grandchildren, church picnics, graduations, a black and white photo of her younger self standing beside a school bus, smiling like she had a secret. "You did not have to bring all this," she said. "I know," Darius replied. "That is why it is called being nice." She gave him a look. "You are too old to be getting smart with me. I learned from the best." They sat at her kitchen table, and for a while neither of them talked about the park. Evelyn poured tea. Darius ate one cinnamon roll before she could stop him. Then she looked down at her hands. Her wrists were marked purple where the cuffs had been. "I kept thinking maybe I said something wrong," she said softly. "Maybe I sounded rude when I asked why they wanted my bag. Maybe I should have just let them look." Darius put his coffee down. "No." She looked at him. "No what? No, you should not have to make yourself smaller so somebody else feels powerful." Evelyn blinked fast. "You make that sound simple." "It is simple," he said. "It just is not easy." That afternoon, Lieutenant Ellison called Darius. She asked him and Evelyn to come to the station for formal statements. Darius almost said no. The thought of bringing Evelyn back into another room full of uniforms made his stomach tighten. But Evelyn surprised him. She stood in her hallway with her cane in one hand and her green knitted cap in the other, dressed in a clean blue blouse and the same burgundy coat, and said, "I am going." Darius looked at her carefully. "You sure?" "No," she said. "But I'm going anyway." The police station was already surrounded by reporters when they arrived. Not a huge crowd, nothing like a national scandal, but enough to make the sidewalk feel smaller. A local news van parked near the entrance. Two people held signs that said, "Justice for Evelyn and listen before you judge." One man had a sign that read, "Do better Briarfield," which was probably the most Briarfield sign imaginable. Inside, Lieutenant Ellison met them herself. She had changed out of her field uniform and into a dark blazer. But she looked just as serious. "Mrs. Parker," she said, "I am sorry for what happened to you." Evelyn nodded, but she did not say thank you. Darius noticed that, so did Ellison. "Sorry is a beginning," Evelyn said. "So did Ellison. It cannot be the whole thing." Ellison looked at her for a long moment. "No, ma'am, it cannot." They led Evelyn and Darius into a conference room where a civilian investigator from the county oversight office was waiting. Her name was Rachel Medina, and she had the calm voice of someone who had spent years listening to people describe things they never wanted to remember. She asked Evelyn to walk through the afternoon minute by minute. Evelyn did not rush. She described the apple butter, the kettle corn, the walk to the creek, the way Officer Vance had looked at her bag before he ever asked her name. She described falling. She described the grass against her cheek. Then she stopped. Her hand shook around the teacup in front of her. Darius reached across the table, but before he could touch her hand, she looked up at Rachel and said, Do you know what hurt the most? Rachel waited. It was not the ground. It was not even the handcuffs. It was hearing that officer tell everyone I was resisting when I was just trying not to be scared. Rachel wrote something down, then looked over at Darius. Mr. Cole, did Officer Vance recognize Mrs. Parker before the arrest? Darius frowned. I do not know. Rachel slid a printed photo across the table. It was a screenshot from a security camera outside the fair. In it, Vance was standing near the jewelry booth before the encounter. Across from him was Marla Benton, the woman who had reported the pendant missing. Darius looked at the image. Then he looked at Rachel. Why is he talking to her? Rachel's expression did not change, but her voice got quieter. That is what we are trying to find out. The room went still. Evelyn looked from the photo to Darius, and something in her face shifted from pain to confusion, maybe even anger. Because suddenly this was not just about a rushed officer and a bad decision. There was a chance somebody had pointed Vance toward her on purpose. Darius leaned back in his chair, staring at the grainy image on the page. Outside the conference room, reporters were shouting questions through the glass doors of the station. Inside, the old clock over the filing cabinet ticked once, then twice, then again. And Darius knew, deep in his gut, that Mason Creek Park had only been the beginning. The county oversight office moved faster than most people expected, and in Briarfield that alone was enough to make folks suspicious. Normally, anything involving paperwork, committees, and government buildings took just long enough for everyone to forget why they were angry in the first place. But this time there were videos, dozens of them, from people at the park, from the fair, from a woman walking her dog who had caught Officer Vance talking to Marla Benton before Evelyn was stopped. There were text messages too. Not dramatic movie villain stuff, not a secret plan written in giant red letters, but enough to show a pattern once somebody finally bothered to look. Marla had been furious about the missing pendant, mostly because it was supposed to be the centerpiece of a charity auction her husband had been bragging about for weeks. Councilman Benton was running for county commissioner, and the auction was one of those polished little events where people smiled too hard and pretended the raffle tickets were more important than the photographs. The pendant was not just jewelry to Marla, it was part of the image, and when it disappeared, she wanted someone blamed before the story got bigger than she could control. The problem was Marla had seen Evelyn near the booth earlier that afternoon, but only for a few seconds. Evelyn had stopped to compliment a necklace shaped like a maple leaf, then moved on. That was it, but Marla remembered the burgundy coat. Officer Vance remembered the pressure he was under to look useful, and somewhere between a missing pendant and a bruised ego, a harmless old woman became the easiest target in the park. Rachel Medina laid it all out 3 days later in a closed meeting at the Briarfield station. Darius sat beside Evelyn at the long conference table, his hands folded in front of him, jaw tight, trying not to let anger make decisions for him. Lieutenant Ellison sat across from them with a thick folder open in front of her. Officer Boone was there too, pale and nervous, looking like he had not slept much since the park. Officer Vance was not in the room. He had been placed on administrative leave and was waiting with a union representative in another office down the hall. Rachel tapped one of the printed messages with a pen. "This was sent by Marla Benton to Officer Vance at 2:18 that afternoon," she said. "It says, I saw an older black woman near the table. Burgundy coat." She looked nervous. "Please do not let this get swept under the rug." Evelyn stared at the page. Darius felt her body go still beside him. Rachel continued. "At 2:22, Officer Vance replied, I will take care of it." "Take care of it," Darius repeated. His voice was low, but everybody heard it. Rachel nodded. "There is no evidence Mrs. Benton told Officer Vance to hurt Mrs. Parker. There is no evidence she knew he would use force, but she gave him a vague description, and he acted on it without verifying anything." Lieutenant Ellison leaned back in her chair, and he treated that description as if it were proof. Rachel looked toward Boone. Officer Boone's statement confirms that Officer Vance decided Mrs. Parker was the suspect before asking any meaningful questions. Boone swallowed. "He said it would be a quick stop," he said. "He said if we brought in the wrong person, we could sort it out later." Evelyn looked at him then. "Later," she said quietly. Boone lowered his eyes. "I am sorry." "You should be," she said. There was no yelling in her voice, and somehow that made it heavier. "You were standing right there." Boone nodded. "I know." Darius expected Evelyn to keep going. He expected her to say something sharp, something that would make Boone feel every second of what he had watched happen. Instead, she looked at the folder, then at the bruises still fading on her wrist and said, "You are young, so I hope this is the day you learn that following somebody is still a choice." Boone looked like he might cry. Darius sat back in his chair and felt a strange kind of respect rise in him. Evelyn had every reason to hate the room, every reason to turn herself into stone. But she was still trying to make sure the next person did not get treated the same way. That was who she had always been. Rachel turned to the last section of her report. The pendant was found yesterday evening. Everyone looked up. "Where?" Darius asked. "In a storage case, behind the jewelry display. It had fallen through a seam in the lining when the booth was being packed." For a second, nobody said anything. The missing pendant, the thing that started all of it, had never been stolen at all. It had been sitting a few feet away from Marla Benton the whole time. Darius let out a breath and rubbed his forehead. So Evelyn got thrown to the ground over a necklace that was not even missing. "Correct," Rachel said. Evelyn gave a small laugh then, the kind people make when the truth is too ridiculous to carry any other way. "Well," she said, "that is just about the dumbest thing I have ever heard." Darius looked at her. "You have met some dumb things in this town." "Oh, honey," she said, "I taught high school lunch duty for 30 years. I have seen dumb wearing a varsity jacket." Even Lieutenant Ellison almost smiled. It did not fix anything, but the laugh loosened the room for half a second. Then Rachel closed the folder. "Officer Vance is being referred for disciplinary action based on excessive force, unlawful detention, and failure to follow procedure. The county prosecutor will review whether criminal charges are appropriate. Officer Boone will remain suspended during a separate review." Darius looked at Ellison. "And Marla Benton?" Ellison's expression hardened. "She will be interviewed regarding the false assumption she encouraged, but at this point we do not have evidence she knowingly made a false report. Still, she has a lot to answer for." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Everybody does. The story should have ended there, at least the way stories usually end when people want a clean little package tied up with a bow. The bad officer gets punished. The old woman gets an apology. The town learns a lesson. Everybody goes home and sleeps better. But that is not how Briarfield worked, and honestly, it is not how people work either." The video kept spreading. Some people stood with Evelyn right away. They brought flowers to her house, dropped off meals, wrote long posts about dignity and police reform. Others said Vance had made a mistake but should not lose his job over one bad call. A few said he had been doing his best in a difficult situation, and some people, the ones Darius had expected, made it about him. They said he had turned a simple investigation into a public spectacle. They said he had intimidated the officers. They said if he had not gotten involved, everything would have been handled quietly. Darius read those comments late one night at the gym, sitting alone under the flickering lights while a speed bag swung gently in the corner. He knew better than to read comments. Everybody knew better. But people still did it, the same way they ate gas station sushi or called an ex after midnight. Curiosity had a way of making fools out of us. He stared at one comment for a long time. It said maybe if that guy had not made such a scene, the police could have figured it out without all the drama. Darius almost laughed. Then he put the phone down and looked around the empty gym. On the far wall was a faded mural the kids had painted years ago. It said, "Keep your hands up." Most people thought it was about boxing. Darius knew it was about everything else, too. A week later, the town council held a public meeting at the old civic hall. The room was packed so tight, people were standing in the hallway and watching through the open doors. Evelyn wore her burgundy coat again. Darius noticed it when she walked in and raised an eyebrow. "You sure you want to wear that?" he asked. Evelyn looked down at it. "I bought this coat after my husband died," she said. "First thing I ever bought just because I liked it. I will be damned if I let one bad afternoon turn it into a costume for fear." Darius nodded. Fair enough. Inside the hall, Councilman Benton sat at the front table beside Marla. He looked uncomfortable, which Darius figured was about the closest thing to justice some politicians ever experienced. Marla looked different than she had at the fair. Smaller somehow. No fancy jewelry, no perfect hair, no sharp voice directing volunteers around a booth. Just a woman sitting under bright lights with every bad assumption she had made, now resting in front of her. Lieutenant Ellison gave the official update first. She explained that Officer Vance had been terminated from the department following the internal review. Officer Boone had resigned before the final hearing, and the department had agreed to send his file to the state licensing board. There would be new mandatory training on de-escalation, bias awareness, and the proper use of probable cause. An independent complaint panel would be created, with members from outside the department. People listened. Some clapped. Some looked skeptical. Darius understood both reactions. Training was good, oversight was good, but neither one could give Evelyn back that moment on the grass when she had looked around and wondered whether anyone believed her. Then the public comment period began. A local pastor spoke first, then the woman in the blue scarf from the park, then Evan, the teenager with the soccer jersey, who said he had almost deleted the video because he did not think it mattered. "I'm glad I did not," he said, voice cracking a little, "because people kept saying nobody knew what happened, but we did know. We just had to show it." That got the loudest applause of the night. Then Darius stepped to the microphone. He did not bring notes. He had spent too many years talking to kids who could tell when you were trying to sound important. He looked around the room at his old teachers, former classmates, parents from the gym, people who had supported him, people who had doubted him, people who had probably come just to see whether he would lose his temper. He took a breath. "I do not think Officer Vance woke up that morning planning to hurt Miss Evelyn," he said. "I think he woke up wanting to feel important, wanting to look decisive, wanting to be the guy who solved the problem before anybody else could. And that is exactly why this matters. Because when somebody with power starts caring more about being right than being careful, people get hurt." The room went quiet. Darius looked toward the council table. A badge is not supposed to make a person bigger than everybody else. It is supposed to remind them how much responsibility they carry. He paused, then added, "And for the folks saying I made a scene, you were right about one thing. There was a scene. A woman was face down in the grass. The only question is why it took a crowd, cameras, and a lot of noise for anyone to call it wrong. Nobody clapped at first. Then Evelyn did. Slow, steady, one clap at a time. The rest of the room followed. It was not the kind of applause that sounded like celebration. It sounded more like people agreeing to something they should have admitted a long time ago. After the meeting, Marla Benton approached Evelyn near the side exit. Darius saw her coming and almost stepped between them, but Evelyn touched his arm. "Let her talk," she said. Marla looked nervous, really nervous. "Mrs. Parker," she began, "I'm sorry." Evelyn waited. Marla took a breath. "I was scared about the pendant. I panicked. I saw you near the booth and I told Officer Vance what I thought I saw. I should have said I was not sure. I should have waited." Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. "You should have." Marla nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I know." "You looked at me and saw a story you were ready to believe," Evelyn said. "You did not see me." Marla had no answer to that. There really was not one. After a moment, Evelyn said, "I forgive you enough not to carry this poison around in my own body, but I do not want you forgetting it." Marla wiped her eyes. "I will not." Darius watched her walk away, and he felt something settle in his chest. Not forgiveness exactly. Not closure either. More like the first honest breath after holding it too long. Months passed. The bruises on Evelyn's wrist faded. Her hip healed slowly, though cold weather still bothered it. The complaint board started meeting every month. Some officers hated it, some welcomed it. A few younger officers began showing up at community events without uniforms just to talk. Darius invited them to the gym one Saturday to work with the teenagers. At first it was awkward. One officer got hit in the nose by a 12-year-old named Malik during a sparring drill, and Malik immediately apologized so hard you would have thought he'd committed a federal crime. The officer laughed, handed him a tissue and said, "Kid, that is the most honest hit I have taken all week." Everybody laughed. It was not a miracle. Ryefield did not suddenly become perfect. People still argued at town meetings. The police still made mistakes. Social media still turned every local issue into a bonfire. But something had changed. People asked more questions now. They recorded when they needed to. They spoke up sooner. And maybe most importantly, they stopped assuming that a person in authority was automatically right just because they sounded confident. One cold morning in early spring, Darius found Evelyn sitting on the same stone bench by Mason Creek. She had a thermos beside her, a bag of crackers in her lap, and her burgundy coat buttoned all the way to her chin. He sat down next to her. "You feeding the ducks again?" he asked. "They are terrible conversationalists," she said, tossing a cracker toward the water, but at least they do not interrupt. Darius smiled. For a while they watched the creek move past them. The park looked ordinary again. Kids on bicycles. Dogs pulling their owners in every direction. Somebody jogging too fast for no good reason. Evelyn looked at him and said, "You know what still bothers me? A lot of things, probably." "That too. But I keep thinking, what if you had not been here?" Darius looked down at his hands. Somebody else would have stepped up. Evelyn gave him the kind of look only an older woman can give when she knows you are trying to be noble and she is not buying it. "Maybe," she said, "but you were there." He did not answer right away. Finally he said, "I almost kept walking." Evelyn turned toward him. "You did?" For about 2 seconds, he nodded toward the path. "I heard shouting and thought, not my problem. Then I saw you." Evelyn was quiet. Darius leaned back against the bench. That is the part people do not say out loud. Courage is not always some big, clean thing. Sometimes it is just being tired, wanting to go home, wanting to avoid trouble, and deciding you cannot live with yourself if you do. Evelyn nodded slowly. "That sounds about right." The ducks moved closer, waiting for more crackers. Darius reached into the bag and tossed one into the water. "You know they are going to start expecting this." "That is how kindness works," Evelyn said. "You do it once, and suddenly somebody thinks the world might be safe." Darius looked at her then, at the woman who had fed him when nobody knew he was hungry, the woman who had been humiliated in front of a crowd and still found a way to teach people something afterward. "You still think the world is safe?" he asked. Evelyn smiled, but it was not a simple smile. "No," she said, "I think the world is dangerous sometimes, but I also think people can surprise you." The camera, if there had been one, would have pulled back right there. 2 people on a stone bench, a quiet creek, the same park where everything had gone wrong, now holding a small, ordinary moment that somehow meant more than all the shouting did, and maybe that is what stayed with Darius most. Not the sirens, not the video, not even the crowd. It was the fact that one person had been treated like she did not matter, and then a whole town had to decide whether it was willing to become the kind of place where that could happen again. So what do you think? Was Officer Vance just one reckless man making a terrible decision, or was he the result of a system that had been letting too many people get away with too much for too long? And when someone in your community is being treated unfairly, how far should you go before stepping in? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because this is one of those stories where there is no easy answer, only the question of what kind of person we choose to be when nobody else has moved yet. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful stories about courage, community, and the moments that change people for good.